Hey everybody, Eric Hayden here in the garden. First week of November, still have some blooms behind me. We'll show you those here in a second. Traditionally, as we get into the months of May and October, those are our best rose growing blooms. Do we have blooms in the summer? Yes, but temperatures in the 90s and the humidity, they tend to be much smaller, and we have a lot of insect and disease pressure. As we get into the fall months, as we cool off, traditionally we get some nice blooms in October, even into November if we don't get a hard frost. December is not out of the question, again, if we don't have a frost. The other day we got down to 33. It was very brief and we had some patchy frost in the yard, but it does not seem to have really impacted the roses. So I want to give you a tour of the garden first week of November, show you some blooms such as Dublin. It's looking really, really nice. Marilyn Monroe and Louise Estes, a few that we're going to show you. But overall, the garden's looking good. Growth is still really good. If you saw some of our videos before, we took out about a third of the roses, the height of them, and they've really bounced back. And it seems aggressive when you prune, but a nice pruning can certainly do that. This is Louise Estes, very, very nice pink rose. It's a rose that we use for exhibiting. You can have hybrid teas, old garden roses. A rose that you use for exhibiting tends to have form like that more consistently. So for example, something like a Mr. Lincoln has some form, but it doesn't last very long, so it tends not to be a show rose. Whereas something like I just showed you, Louise Estes, or this lovely bloom, this is Dublin, time in and time again, the roses on the bush tend to have form. So as I go back out, I have 10 blooms or so on the bush, and I'd say, at least 50% of them are going to look like this. Some are going to be smaller, some might have some insect damage, but by and large, as far as form goes, you're always getting something really good. So that's what I tend to grow in the garden. They don't have the disease resistance of other roses, but they have those really nice blooms. Another good example of this is Baby's Blush. The downside, again, not the most disease-resistant rose, especially when you haven't been as aggressive spraying, and that certainly has been my issue this year. But look at that pinpoint center. And again, if I was doing a rose show, I would cover it up so we wouldn't get those blemishes. But that's straight out of the garden, no camera tricks, no nothing, looking really, really good. Another rose that we exhibit with, this can be a little small in eastern North Carolina, especially in the heat. So especially in the cooler months, it does look better. This is Marilyn Monroe, another really, really nice rose. And you'll notice that with different roses, some, by and large, they tend to do better in the fall, or the spring and the fall, the cooler months. Again, 70, 80 degree weather during the day, cool weather at night really brings out the colors. Speaking of that, there's a Double Delight, very, very nice one. This one, headliner, looks good in my garden. It does tend to have a lot of issues for me with thrips. So spectacular coloring, but I don't know if light colored roses are going to be my thing. You can see the thrip damage there as well. If you've been following our page, I've mentioned that my son really likes Yolande de Aragon. It's primarily a spring bloomer. All the literature says it repeats. I had not seen that until this year. I don't know if it was coincidence or when I actually did it, because I thought I pruned in past years, but I pruned in the late summer, and that brought on a nice flush of roses. Again, I'm more of a hybrid tea fan. I wish on YouTube you could smell through the mobile phone, TV, however you're watching us, because this is just outstanding. But it also has a nice coloring on it as well. So that's Yolande de Aragon. Couple more roses I'll show you, then I'll wrap things up. One thing I'll mention, some roses tend to do better in the spring, and then others do better in the fall, and then a third group do better all the time. And the example so far, at least for me, has been Hot Princess. Outstanding growth, but man, at least for me here in eastern North Carolina, the fall blooms tend to be really small. This is extremely small, a nice vibrant pink. But I got some outstanding and not a lot of form for me in the fall. I got a lot of nice Hot Princesses in the spring. So that, for me, tends to be more of a spring rose. A rose that does well in the spring and fall is Gemini. And again, no touch-ups with that. Look at that coloring. I won my first rose show in 2015. The top prize in a show is a queen a show, and up in Syracuse I won with this variety. You can see why. I haven't done any grooming, I haven't done any covering, no nothing, and it just looks outstanding. So it's kind of neat. That's also why I have a variety. I mentioned the other day I grow a variety of roses primarily for rose shows, but I like to have some fragrance, and that's why I have Dolly Parton and Mr. Lincoln, things like that that would probably never win in a rose show, but I still grow it for fragrance. I also grow a variety of hybrid teas because some do better in the fall, some do better in the spring, and some do better both seasons, like Gemini. I mentioned in one of our last videos just a good growing rose that's just outstanding in terms of color, but also vase life. This is Veteran's Honor. I cannot say enough about this rose, and luckily it's in commerce even at your local nurseries. Check out the height on it. Good growing rose. It doesn't have the fragrance like a Mr. Lincoln, but again, a huge bloom on it. Holds up in the weather, and what I mean by that, the heat it grows well. Raindrops don't impact it. Some roses get really not so good looking in the rain, and you don't want to have to be covering up blooms just to have a nice one. So that's outstanding, and you can see even the little spider likes it as well. I've really backed off on my insecticide spraying because I'm not growing any blooms for rose shows, so I really don't care if I get a couple holes from insects, so I've noticed more. We'll wrap up on this one. This is Sunny Sundays. This has some sentimental value because John Smith, the hybridizer of Sunny Sundays, got the name from my father. So that's kind of a neat little thing on that. I forget the patronage, the crossing of this parentage, excuse me. But it's a really nice one. And again, it's an older bloom right now. You can see the water damage, but look at the form and the coloring. Looks very similar to Sheila's Perfume. Except instead of being a floribunda like Sheila, it's a hybrid tea. So it's a much bigger bloom. So that's it from the garden. First week of November, not too shabby. I think the record for tallest one might be Marlin's Day. It was Hot Princess, Let Freedom Ring, all about 8.5 feet. And it looks like after the pruning, Marlin's Day shot up some more. So these are the most mature roses of my garden. They were planted in spring of 2017, so they've got 3 years on them, and you can tell they are growing quite nicely. I said Sunny Sundays would be the last one, but here's a comparison. That's Sheila's Perfume. Very nice, and it has fragrance. It is a smaller bloom of a rose because it's a floribunda, so it doesn't have the size of a hybrid tea. Here's one of the other Louise Esseses. I should mention the last one I showed you was a maiden rose that was planted in 2019. So in a pot, potted up, and then planted in the garden summer of 2019. So this is over a year in the ground, and the other one was as well. And you can see that's a maiden rose from Steve Singer, looking pretty good. If you follow our page, these two smaller ones here are maiden roses from this year. On the right is Cajun Moon, on the left is Maverick. They got potted up, and they potted up this past spring, planted in the ground in the summertime. So they'll take a little while to get to maturity. I'll wrap things up. You can hear the dog pound around me. Hopefully these dogs keep the deer out of my yard. I get some benefit to all the barking that I get to hear when I'm out in my garden. Hope everyone's doing well. Again, this is a tour from the first week of November here in eastern North Carolina. Haven't had a hard frost yet, just patchy. So we're still enjoying the blooms while we can. Hope everyone's safe and healthy. And as always, I appreciate the new subscribers on our channel. Have a great one.